So it is straight up noon. Um, we have about 35 people in the room. I appreciate your time, and I know that times are strange and they are challenging, and there are a lot of competing interests for your time. So I appreciate that you've joined us today. Um, um, is muted during the session, just because we all have little background noises. I am going to encourage questions throughout the presentation, so I encourage everyone to use the chat room. Should be at the bottom of your screen with a little speaking balloon. If you have a question, I have the chat box up right now. Just type it in, and as we go along, I'll pause every now and then and answer questions as we have them. But also, I plan on wrapping this up with some cases, and I really want your opinion on how you would approach some questions with these cases. So do please have your chat box open, and that way we can all participate as we go along. So again, that wasn't, there we go. Welcome, and thank you for joining me again. My name is Shauna Strickland. I'm an Associate Executive Director at the American Association for Respiratory Care in Irving. My background is that I am a respiratory therapist, so I am one of my members, but I also have experience in healthcare ethics, and I functioned as a consultant, an ethics consultant at the University of Missouri Health Center in their Center for Bioethics. And I still participate with them as a scholar in their program. So a lot of my ethics experience, formal and experiential, is with health ethics. And I've taught ethics for a really long time. About 15 years now, I've taught various classes focused on ethics. Again, mostly with that healthcare focus. So reframing myself to talk about and think about ethics in the association has been absolutely fascinating, especially over the last couple of weeks as we've all been faced with some really challenging situations. A lot of people in my readings and my conversations, a lot of people say, oh, there's really nothing different between the for-profit world and the nonprofit world. Business ethics is the same for everybody. And I would argue against that. I would argue that the nonprofit world has a guiding principle that we don't see that much in for-profits. And that is that no one individual is to profit from the organization. And losing sight of that principle is a root cause to many of the scandals in the nonprofit world. And so we'll get into a few issues. But here are our learning objectives for today. We will define ethical principles. We'll discuss some decision-making frameworks for ethical decisions and dilemmas. And we'll run through some case studies to apply what we've discussed. So let's start with our foundation work. Why is it so important to have this discussion on ethics? Well, if you're studying for your CAE, it's actually on the examination. So you might be here because you want to have a small primer as you get ready for that examination. But if you've already earned your CRC or your CAE, which is probably a larger piece of the folks who are in the room with us today, you need an ethics credit for your credential. But I'm going to say that a lot of us need to have these conversations because at our core, we want to do the right thing. It's important to take inventory of your ethical behavior, make adjustments so that your constituents still have trust in you and in the organization. So as we go through this, I want to start with some foundation discussions, but I want us to consider all of the stakeholders that we have within our organizations. Clearly, we have our members, those people we directly serve, but we also have as stakeholders our governing boards, volunteer leadership, our employees, and we have an ethical obligation to our employees as well. We have an ethical obligation to our community, to other associations that are in the same realm as us. So the ethical obligation of our organization doesn't just stop at the membership. There's a broader piece of this. And I know from conversations that I've had with others, when we think about ethics, we're thinking about, oh, are members behaving ethically? But I want us to take a step back and think about our employees behaving ethically, our volunteer leadership behaving ethically, and so on. So as we go through this, please keep that in mind. So let's start way back at the beginning. Morality, ethics, and the law. There are differences here. Our morality is the shared belief about right and wrong conduct in a culture, society, subculture, group, whatever we're talking about, organization. Ethics is the discipline that studies and provides an analysis of that morality. So ethics and morality are not the same thing. And something to consider is that the law is the minimum standard of behavior in society. Just because it's legal doesn't mean that it is necessarily ethical. Ethical leadership, then, is the study of the behaviors and decision-making processes in leadership. The decisions that we make are informed by how our moral compass is formed. And our moral compass is formed by, first, our environment, or where we were raised, our community, our culture, our religion, our family. Our culture, our morality is also shaped by our stage of development. I'm not going to go into the Kohlberg stages of development, but as we progress, both in age and experience, those experiences over time help also to form our morality. Now, when we talk about morality, we've got three different subsets: personal, societal, and group morality. So personal morality is just that. It's our own personal morality based on our values, our experiences, and our beliefs. Societal morality is a shared morality held by society at large. This is developed with common values and beliefs. It's not uncommon for individuals to not completely agree with societal morality. I think we all see that in our own personal lives on a regular basis. Group morality is the morality held by a certain group of individuals, such as members of DFWAE, or a church congregation, or a fraternity or sorority. This morality is also developed with common values, beliefs, and goals within the context of that group of people. So that that group of people would have a morality that could be different from an individual's morality, as well as the societal morality at large. So again, there's the potential that the individual within that group doesn't necessarily agree with that group morality. And just to give us a bit of a baseline, let's briefly look at a few of the more popular ethical theories. On this slide, I have the theory, the basic point of that theory, and then some authors that you might have heard of over the years. So deontology, or duty-based, states that decisions should be based solely by considering one's duties and the rights of others. Therefore, the act could be ethically wrong, even if it produces the best possible outcome. So the ends do not justify the means. Utilitarianism, or consequentialism, is that right and wrong depends on the consequences of the actions. So in this case, the ends do justify the means. The action is right if it leads to the most benefit or the least harm for the greater number of people. Virtue ethics focuses on the character of a person, not the act. So if a person acts as a moral exemplar would act, then they have acted in an ethical fashion. The problem with virtue ethics is that it might not take into consideration tragic situations or offer adequate moral guidance. We don't really know who this moral exemplar is necessarily, who we're supposed to be emulating. And the last one is the one that we see most often in medicine, the principles approach. These are the ones on this slide are the big 4 principles of principalism as it pertains in the medical world. Beneficence, which is to do a positive good. Non-maleficence, which is to actively avoid harm. Autonomy, which is the right to make our own choices. And justice, so we have to treat persons fairly. Here's the challenge with principalism, though. there are 4 different principles on this list, on this slide that I've provided here. Which one is most important? Do I always go with autonomy? Is it always best to honor your decision to make your own decisions? Or should I always aim to do a positive good? That's the challenge. It's all situational. And we would all argue about which particular principle should be followed in that situation. So the whole point in identifying the theory is that that's our foundation for how we make decisions. So when we're going through this decision-making process, we have a fairly systematic fashion. The moral agent, that's likely you, is someone who acts for themselves while also trying to conform to a standard of behavior. So I'm the moral agent in the situation. I have to make a decision. The decision I make needs to be one that is ethical at its base. So I have to determine a course of action to achieve my desired outcome. So the desired outcome is the intended course of action. So it seems to be a linear process. The moral agent develops a course of action to achieve a desired outcome. But in reality, I'm the moral agent. I have to identify what my desired outcome is before I can identify what course of action is going to be best to achieve that desired outcome. So that course of outcome includes our analysis of the situation, our judgment process, and then the ultimate decision. So without a clear direction, we can't set that, that course of action. So we categorize our ethical scenarios in such a way as to identify the root cause so that we can analyze the situation appropriately and come up with an ethically supported course of action. So we have several different types of ethical categories, we'll say. The first one is the overarching ethical issue. An ethical issue is just that. It's an issue that might have ethical consequences, but not necessarily all of them being negative. It's simply a situation where I say, I have to take a step back, think this through to identify what the appropriate course of action would be. Under that, though, as we progress, our ethical situations might have serious negative implications, and we tend to call those an ethical problem. We won't focus too much on issues or problems. What I really want to talk about are ethical distress and ethical dilemma. So an ethical distress would be a situation where you know what the right thing is to do, but something is stopping you from doing the right thing. We have 2 different types, 2 different prototypes, a type A and a type B. Type A ethical distress is when you know what's preventing you from accomplishing this ethically supported course of action. So for example, you know that there's an employee who is taking supplies from the central supply area for their personal use. Box of ink pens, box of paper clips, ream of paper, you know, whatever. You know it's wrong. They really shouldn't be stealing from the company. But you really like this person. You're a friend with this person. There's a little bit of peer pressure in the office. Everybody knows this person takes stuff from the supply cart, but nobody wants to rat them out, tell on them, get them into trouble. So because you want to keep your colleague's friendship, you are prevented from notifying your supervisor to say, hey, this person is stealing from the supply cart. So that's a type A barrier. You know the right thing to do is to stop the person from stealing. The barrier is your relationship with that person and not wanting to negatively impact your relationship by telling on this person, telling your direct supervisor. Other barriers include policies and procedures that might get in the way, financial restraints, personal feelings or biases, or anxiety or fear. A type B ethical distress occurs when the desired outcome can be identified. You know what you want to achieve, but you're having a really hard time figuring out what that barrier is to move forward and get to that course of action. So a brand new situation, something that you've never experienced before, or a really complex situation could be classified as type B. You just don't know how to get to that desired outcome. An ethical dilemma, and this is what we'll focus on more today, includes 2 or more ethically supported courses of action, but you can't take both. You can't do both of these things. Choosing one of those paths, which you're going to have to choose one, over the other will result in negative consequences, and you have to accept those negative consequences. So I have a dilemma. If I take plan A, then I have to accept that I will these set of negative consequences. If I take plan B, then I have to accept a different set of consequences, and I can't do both. So let's take an example of this. Before I go to the next slide though, I want you to go to the Wayback Machine and pretend it's last Wednesday when I made this slide. Because today, this decision has been taken out of our hands. It's last Wednesday. You have an upcoming conference of about 200 people, and last Wednesday, you didn't know if it was better to go ahead and hold your event, even though the SARS-CoV-2 virus was spreading, or if canceling the event is just a reaction based on fear. What do? Do we hold the meeting? Or do we protect our members? What's the better option? I am sure that this time last week, everybody on this call was facing a similar situation. Do I protect the public health at the expense of the meeting, or do I, and not hold the event, or do I protect the public health at the expense of the meeting and potentially have a PR hit and most definitely lose money and cancel the meeting? So I could hold the event, put safety at risk. We go back and forth, right? I'm sure you went through this debate last week. So again, this ethical dilemma might have many potential courses of action that can lead to many supported desired outcomes, but you have to critically think through the situation to find the one that's going to work best in that situation. And then you have to accept the negative consequences that come with the meeting. So clearly, we have prioritized public health and safety by canceling our meetings and practicing social distancing to reduce the risk of spreading the virus, as evidenced by us meeting here in this room instead of over in Addison at Texas CPA. Thank you, by the way, to those folks who were willing to let us come to their joint today. But we also have to accept the consequences of those situations, right? There's the potential of losing money, maybe losing our exhibitors' relationships. If we cancel the meeting, they might not come back to us if we have to cancel the meeting. But we've made the priority of everyone's health and safety versus financial gain. So let's talk about how we make these decisions. I have 3 different decision-making models on the screen. I will tell you that there is one I prefer to use, but it's only because I've been using that particular model for 20 years, so I'm most comfortable with it. They all have the same basic tenets, though. They're still asking you to identify the root cause, strategically think through the situation, apply your ethical theory, come up with some practical alternatives. I prefer to use the Portillo and Doherty method, which is on the far left of the screen. But the ACA model and the ethic model are both perfectly appropriate. I like that the Portillo and Doherty method only has 6 steps to it. That makes it easy. So first off, we have to gather all of our relevant information, right? Very rarely do we have an ethical dilemma dropped in our lap where we actually have all of the information we could possibly need to make our decision right then. So we have to ask the questions. Whatever the situation is, what more information do I need? Am I talking with all the stakeholders? You've all had this situation where somebody's come to your office and said, I'm going to pick on Asha because she was laughing at me earlier, and this is all in good nature. Asha comes to my office and says, so-and-so is stealing everything out of the supply closet. And I say, doggone it, we need to go fix this. But if I don't follow up and gather more information and I only go off of that one small piece of information that I have, I'm likely not seeing the whole picture. So I need to see the whole picture in order to logically think through my options and what action I need to take. And then I'm going to identify the type of an ethical problem. Is this a dilemma? Is this an ethical distress? Is this simply a situation that might potentially have negative outcomes, and I need to worry about how I'm going to mitigate those? So I need to categorize what I'm facing. And then I need to think through the framework, the ethical framework that I prefer to use. And so again, I've been in medicine for a lot of years. I tend to use the principlism approach. Maybe you prefer the utilitarianism approach. Maybe you prefer the deontological approach. You know, there are many, many theories. None of them encompass everything. There's no one right theory to use. But if I'm going to use principlism, then I'm worried about beneficence. Am I doing good? Am I treating people fairly? What is the harm in this situation? If somebody's stealing from the supply cart, the harm is to the financial viability of the organization, right? Non-maleficence, to do harm, would also be to other employees. If I have an employee who's taking all of the supplies out of the supply cart, then the other employees don't have supplies to use while they're doing their job. So there are many ways that I can go down that analytical path. Once I've figured out what the ethical challenge is and I've evaluated it with that principle, then I'm going to look for practical alternatives. What can I do to solve this problem? I could just talk to the person who's been accused of stealing and say, look, you can't do this. See what they have to say. You know, some sort of conversation with that person. I could put a lock on the door. I could stop this business right now, put a lock on the door, and I'm the only one who has the key. I will tell you that I don't like that idea because I don't want to have to open the supply closet every time somebody needs a new ink pen, right? So we're going to walk through a lot of different solutions to get to one that we feel is the most fair, that burdens people the less, that helps us achieve our desired outcome of work supplies being used for work only. Then we're going to complete the action. We're going to do whatever it is we've decided to do off of our list of alternatives. And most importantly, and I think a lot of people miss this step, or at least don't come back to it, because by the time we get to this point, we're tired, we're done with the situation, I just want it over with. But we need to come back and reevaluate the situation. Where did we go wrong? Why did this problem happen to begin with? And what can we do to prevent it from happening in the future so that I don't have to have this challenging conversation with somebody yet again? So I'm going to come back to that Pertillo and Doherty model in a few slides, but I want to take a detour for a few minutes over to the ASAE standard of conduct. So ASAE has a code of conduct. I have them here on this slide. I won't read them to you because you can do that on your own, but there are some key principles that we'll focus on from this standard of conduct. I'll say it again. I think it's important for us as association professionals and representatives of our organization to take inventory of our ethical behavior and make adjustments so that our constituents have trust in us and you and the organization as a whole. Again, I think when we talk about ethics, people immediately think about their members and the ethics of their members and what they're going to do if a member behaves unethically. I think that's a completely different issue right now, and we'll talk about that in a second. So, what are the principles that we see here on this slide? Respect, responsibility, fairness, and honesty. Respect is demonstrating a high regard for oneself, others, and the resources entrusted to you. Those resources could be people, money, reputation, safety of other people, and natural and environmental resources. Think of the trust that our members put into us when we go to an event. When we host a conference, there is a massive level of trust on the members' side, on the attendees' side, on the exhibitor side, where we have said, come to this one location with all these other thousands of people or hundreds of people, depending on how big your meeting is. And we promise to give you quality education. We promise that you will get to network and connect with other people. And then there's an assumption that if I go to this space and I learn in this area, that it's going to be safe, and it's going to be welcoming and inclusive. So there's a huge level of trust in us for that one event. Performance excellence. Uh, a space where diverse perspectives and views are encouraged and valued. We all have different perspectives, which is great. We like diversity. We like to have a unique diversity of thought within our associations, but that takes a lot of trust that our members expect that we're going to deliver that. And so it's our responsibility, nice segue, to take ownership of that and make sure that we provide that to our members. Responsibility is also taking ownership of our decisions, good and bad. We don't always make the right decision. I think we make a lot of decisions that are right in the moment with the information that we have, and then as time moves on, we realize that perhaps we didn't act fast enough or we acted too quickly, and we have to take responsibility for that. And we have to take responsibility for those consequences and own that, bring that back, and make better decisions in the future. Fairness is making decisions and acting impartially and objectively. So we have to understand that our conduct has to be free from competing self-interests. We have to be impartial. We have to be free of favoritism. And that's an issue sometimes with our elected leaders, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But this applies to our elected leadership, our paid leadership, and our employees, so that that fairness is a huge issue. And then, of course, honesty is understanding truth and acting in a truthful manner, both in your communications and your conduct. So there has to be a match of those behaviors. It's probably the most obvious ethical principle, but it's also the one that most quickly damages our reputation. In theory, it's easy, but there are some times when perhaps there's a difference between being truthful and telling too much. For example, when you paint a rosy picture on a grant application, well, of course I want the grant. I want the grant money. Of course I can do these things. Of course our organization is stable and we have all these wonderful people who can do this. And maybe I don't say, you know, we're already working at 110%, but I want the grant money. So of course I'm going to paint this fabulous picture. How honest are you when you estimate the portion of budget that goes to fundraising and the percentage that goes into programs? So we have this balance. For those of us in leadership positions, we have to be careful about how many people, how much information we disseminate toward our direct reports versus how much information is actually relayed in those meetings. We don't want to cause panic. And then there are some situations where the sharing of those truths is not a good idea. But do I have to be ethical? Do I really need to put this much effort into this? Well, you kind of do. If you're studying for the CAE, this slide should be very familiar. If you've recently taken the CAE, the slide should be very familiar. Those of you who have taken the CAE probably want to forget about this, but you can't, right? Sarbanes-Oxley has a section that pertains to codes of ethics, and it applies specifically to the president and principal executive officer and the treasurer or the principal financial officer for promoting the things on these slides. And you'll notice that there are some key words in these bullet points: honesty, conflicts of interest, fair, compliance-related concerns, accountability, which translates to responsibility. So we can see that the principles represented from the ASAE the standards or the codes of ethics are easily identified within this particular area. So, is your organization ethical? Well, you could do an ethics audit if you wanted to. It is a risk management strategy that can help you avoid legal liability. It can protect your organization's mission and those it serves, and it could model the way for other nonprofits in the community. It's also, quite honestly, the right thing to do. A comprehensive ethics audit should be conducted regularly, kind of like our financial audits, every 3 to 5 years, depending on the needs of your organization and how things change. And then maybe an annual review of any changes to external legal standards or major changes within your organization to see if anything is needs to be reevaluated. You could do this annually to review written guidelines or the soundness of your training or preventative assistance programs. So going through the ethics audit is a little outside the scope of what I wanted to do today, but it is an opportunity for you as an association leader to dig deeper into the culture of your organization and identify any areas of improvement. And just because you have an ethics policy and process doesn't mean that everything is going to go smoothly. So I don't know how many of you have seen this in the news, but I am fascinated by how this has played out. So the Romance Writers of America, this is the Association for People Who Write Romance Books. And the short story is one member, one very, very famous author member was sanctioned for ethics violation complaints from 2 other members. The confounding variable here is that this person also happened to be the chair of their membership ethics committee. So she had to recuse herself from the ethics committee. The ethics committee had to debate about this, and then they decided to sanction her. They sent the recommendation to the board. After the fact, board members stated that they felt pressured to push this through and to vote yes on the sanction. And so the board did vote to suspend this member for 1 year. Again, this member is an exceptionally well-known romance author. There was a backlash from the group. So the main issue is that this person felt that there were inclusiveness problems with the association, and she took to her social media platform to complain about those. And evidently free speech had been something that this person had championed for quite some time, but her methods had rubbed folks the wrong way for a little too long, and that was the tipping point. So because she took this to her social media, of course, all of the people who followed her on social media got embroiled in this. There was a huge backlash from the membership. They ended up employing an independent firm to run an audit on this process to identify the issues. The link at the bottom of the screen takes you to the entire audit. It is a fascinating read. It's totally public documents. It is a fascinating story of how this all went wrong, even though they had a process in place to handle member-generated ethics violations in this organization. And then by February 2nd, the entire board and 2 paid staff leaders had resigned. So this organization is starting completely from scratch again. I have not followed up with them in the last couple of weeks, so I don't know if anything else has been going on, but one of the findings from the independent audit, what that firm did, was that there were a lot of problems with the process and very little consistency between different groups that evaluated ethical complaints. So definitely some things to learn there. And if you've got a few minutes, which I don't know that anybody has these days, but if you did, I would recommend taking a peek at that document and learning from their mistakes, most definitely. So I don't want to call people bad. There are a lot of reasons that people act in a way that is not ethically supported. And sometimes this is just a person in a bad situation. Sometimes it's our fault for putting people in that situation. Um, if we have not made our expectations known, how can we then expect people to be successful? We have to give people clear instruction and behavioral expectations. Um, Staff member, we do not steal out of the supply closet, or the supplies in the supply closet are only for office use and not for use in your home. Very clear, um, very clear expectation. Do you have it written down? Is there a policy somewhere that says supplies in the supply closet are not for personal use? Do you have codes of conduct? Do you have a value statement? Do you train people to act ethically in your organization? How do you onboard people? How do you provide them with this information? If we don't have a system of accountability, though, we may unknowingly be promoting these unethical behaviors, and the person who's committing them may not see the problem. The Ethics Resource Center in 2007 surveyed nonprofits to find the most at-risk behaviors. So here we have a thermometer. And what's interesting is that the behaviors that most of us think as quote unquote unethical, that are the big unethical ones, are at the bottom of the list. They're pretty low risk. The risk index presents this data in a continuum, but we have these three categories. So the severe risk, which is the red at the top, happens frequently and usually goes unreported. And then we have our high risk, which happens often and often goes unreported, and then guarded, which happens less frequently and may go unreported. So the activities at the high risk area are putting our own interests above the organization. There's our conflicts of interest, and internet abuse, interestingly. Why? We don't police that all that much. What are we super worried about in our organization? I don't want somebody stealing my money. I don't want anybody falsifying documentation. Notice that these are lower on the list because we're hyper aware of those situations. Are we hyper aware of managing conflicts of interest? I was on a call the other day with a subset of our folks, and one of the members mentioned something, and somebody texted me and said, "Isn't that a conflict of interest?" But nobody said anything on the line. Nobody opened it up and said, you're an employee of this organization, of this other organization that you're promoting. You need to disclose that. So we're not as hyper aware. We're not as upfront with making sure that those are reported. So I have talked a super lot already about just basic information, and we're about 40 minutes in, and I want to take some time to actually go through some situations. So I have 3 cases for us, and my original plan was that we would have small group discussions, but clearly that's not going to happen in this type of a venue. So what I'll do is go through the case, and I'll pause for a minute or so and let you type your thoughts into the chat box if you desire. I'm hoping you will. So again, I'm a fan of the Pertillo and Doherty decision-making model. So here are those 6 steps again that we'll go through, and I have some guided question for us as we go through this. So let's start with case number 1. Damon is a staff member of a nonprofit organization in the meetings department. At the annual meeting, an industry partner asked Damon to provide him with a list of attendees and offers Damon tickets to a major league sporting event in town as a thank you. So here are our first few questions. What is our desired outcome? What information do you need that isn't listed? Is there an ethical problem? What is the most ethical course of action? And how could we avoid this in the future? So I will prompt you to type here if you have some thoughts. What is our desired outcome of this interaction between Damon and our industry partner? Anybody want to take a stab at that? And I don't get to see the little ... when people are typing, so I have no idea if anybody's typing. Ah, wonderful. Okay, so one of the desired outcomes is to protect the privacy of our members. Okay. Are there any other outcomes that we need to keep in mind for this interaction? We want to maintain a positive relationship with the partner. Absolutely, absolutely. So now we have a dilemma. Can we do both of these things? Can we protect the privacy of our members and maintain that positive relationship? Are they mutually exclusive? What information do you need that would help you make this decision? Do we have a policy in place for gift giving? Do we have a policy for publishing attendee lists? Have members opted to have their information shared? Great, great question. Is there an ethical problem with this? Is there a problem with Damon accepting the sporting event tickets? Is there a problem with Damon providing the list of attendees? I think this is it depends, right? And we have several comments here. If the list is already available, if we've already published this, then it's there. But we probably should have a policy in place not to accept gifts. What information is allowed on the attendee list? We need to know what people can give. Is the list already published in maybe an app, maybe a mobile app or something that that people have access to? And is the list really a benefit to these people? If it is, maybe we need to have bigger discussions about that. I think one of the problems I have with this is that this person is, I have a visual of our events, our major events, and the exhibit floor. And so I have this visual of Damon, my employee, walking through the exhibit hall, doing his job or her job as they are walking through the exhibit hall, and somebody stopping them and saying, hey, do you think you could get me this list? And by the way, I've got these tickets to this game. So I think I have a problem with that. The question I have for myself is, how well did I prepare Damon to handle that conversation? Hopefully I have. I've onboarded, or we've provided, these things might happen. Here are our policies. And what should we do? What should Damon do at this point? Hopefully the answer is follow the policies, right? Whatever our policy says, that's what Damon should do. And that's how we could avoid any confusion in the future. Also by making sure that our employees know the policies. I don't know about y'all, but we have, before we go to our meetings, we have a big meeting, a pre-meeting, a meeting for a meeting with all of our employees, and we talk about things that they have to know while they go to these events. As I was preparing this and I was coming up with these scenarios, my thought was, I don't know that in our pre-meeting meeting, we've ever said to people, hey, here's the policy on receiving gifts. Here's the policy on what you can and can't do. If somebody asks you for this, you should call so-and-so in whatever office. Because we do take a good chunk of our physical office to our meetings, and people get asked weird questions. And some people are might be a little less than forthright with their intentions, and they might stop somebody that they might think they could confuse to get whatever they want out of that. So let's move on. Our next case, and there we go. Our next case is about Marguerite. Marguerite is a volunteer board member. We love those, for a nonprofit, and she's also an attorney in the community. The board has been in deliberation on a sensitive issue, and this issue has escalated. It's getting to be a big deal, and we now need to hire an attorney. Marguerite has offered legal services pro bono for our organization to resolve the issues. So I'll let you take a peek at that. We know we don't like to spend money. We need an attorney we can trust. Is there a problem with taking Marguerite up on her offer? So we want to know if Marguerite specializes in the issue. We know that attorneys specialize. So does she have that that expertise? Is this a conflict of interest? We need to determine that. Ooh, lots of conflicts of interest. Lots of people saying conflicts of interest. What hat will she be wearing? Well, that's a good point. Does she need to recuse herself from board decisions if we decide as a board that we're going to accept her offer of pro bono legal services? Some part of me says, do we need to talk to a lawyer about that? You can't laugh at me because I can't hear you, but I'm hoping you're laughing with me. This could create friction with other board members. Absolutely. Does Marguerite's perception or does Marguerite's opinion of the situation carry more weight if she's also the pro bono lawyer? And if we disagree with her, are we legally wrong? Or is it simply board members disagreeing? You guys are great on this one. We have a lot of conflicts of interest. What role has she had in the sensitive issue? Great question. Is Marguerite involved? Is this an issue with the board itself, with the board makeup, with somebody on the board? Or is this completely different? Maybe a member issue that has nothing to do with Marguerite. We don't know. As a board member, she might be part of a lawsuit as a board member, so then it would be a conflict if she's representing the organization and also somebody named in a lawsuit. Good point. If she's already made her own assessment of the situation, then that would compromise her ability to be an impartial lawyer, an impartial attorney reviewing this case, if she's already made up her mind about what she thinks is wrong. Is there a policy requiring an RFP for contract services? Do we just go say, hey, yeah, let's take Marguerite because she's here and she's free? Or might there be another attorney in her firm that will handle it? Do we have to worry about whether or not that attorney is a direct report to Marguerite or is in some way coerced in a coercive type of a relationship? Does Marguerite hold a position of power over that person? Really great things. So what do you think? Do we take Marguerite up on her offer, or do we thank her profusely and tell her we prefer to have her as a board member? Or is there a third option that I haven't presented yet? Nobody wants to tell me what to do. We have a no thank you. We have a, you are so valuable as a board member, we don't want to lose you and let somebody else take the job. Perfect. Awesome. We have another option to thank her for her offer, but hire an outside attorney that does not have former knowledge of this. See if she's the best qualified by looking at other options. And she can't be in both roles. So excellent. All right. Let's go to our next situation. This is Remy. At a recent nonprofit board meeting, Remy, who is a new and engaged board member, we love those. Remy witnesses an interaction between the board chairperson and a staff member. The interaction left the staff member very uncomfortable, and Remy is conflicted about how to proceed. So again, the situation didn't involve Remy. Remy witnessed the interaction between the board chairperson and the staff member. And Remy perceives that the staff member is very uncomfortable as a result. So, is there other information that you need? And I left this intentionally vague. So yes, there should be information that you need. Does Remy have a mentor on the board? Good question. How does Remy know the staff member is uncomfortable? So I'm going to make some stuff up on the fly here. As the person was walking away, there was nonverbal body language that is pretty universal on the I'm kind of creeped out, I'm uncomfortable, what do I do now front. Any other information you need about this situation before you can talk about what Remy needs to do? On the flip side, does the chairperson have authority over the staff members? I'm going to say no. And I'm going to fall back on our CAE teachings, board to board, staff to staff communication, and say that no, this is a volunteer chairperson, an elected official, and Remy's, and the other person is not the chief staff officer, but a staff member of the organization. We have someone who says Remy's first action should be to talk with the board chair, but if it's the board chair whose behavior is in question, is that the first person that we want Remy to talk to? Does Remy have a staff liaison? No, the staff person was not the CSE. This was somebody other than the CSE. He should discuss with the president or ask the HR director to check on the staff member. Okay, so we want to make sure that the staff member is feeling supported at this time. Remy should speak with the CSE. The vice chair or the chair-elect could be an option. Remy should first make sure that the staff person truly does feel uncomfortable and what action the staff member would like them to take. So what negative consequence, regardless of how this plays out for the staff member and the board chairperson, what negative consequence is Remy facing at this point for themselves? Remy is new, they're engaged. They may be uncomfortable with the board. They may be disillusioned of joining the board. There's a lot of Remy might be thinking a thing about how they want to move forward with volunteering for this board, right? We've also identified if there's a lawyer or HR to call them for advice. Definitely we should call HR if it was something perhaps illegal. But we also need to know about organizational policies about harassment. So again, here's an onboarding issue that maybe we weren't a very good board to Remy and didn't provide them with the organizational policies so that they would know what to do in this situation. Remy might have also misinterpreted the interaction, which could be false reporting of information. Remy might feel that they might be ostracized if they speak out. So this is clearly a very sensitive issue, but first off, what could we do in the future to avoid this is to provide we should provide some sort of onboarding, make sure that everybody understands the policies and what to do in these situations so that they don't feel like Remy does right now with what do I do in this situation. If it's a complete policy step by step, if you see this, follow these steps, it takes the guesswork out. Remy feels validated because they can just go to the policy and follow the rules, and there's no guesswork. But one of our attendees says it is detrimental to the organization if a board member's actions are in question. Absolutely. So at some point we'll have to figure out a way, if we don't already have it written down, to make sure that these types of situations are investigated appropriately, so that it doesn't cause undue harm to any of the parties involved until we can get all the information and then make a decision at that point. So at this point, I'm going to end with yet another peek at the ASAE Standards of Conduct, because again, these are our core ethical standards for association professionals. We've got just a few minutes left. If there are any questions, I am happy to respond to those. If not, I will simply give you my contact information. I'm always happy to have a cup of coffee and talk about ethical issues if you so desire. So if there are any questions, happy to take them. Otherwise, I thank you very much for your time. Will you have access to my slides? Absolutely. I will send the slides to our leadership team, so that when we send out the post-event information, that the slides can go as well. Thank you all. You are very kind. Thank you. All right, it looks like everybody's ready to go back to their day. Thanks again, and thank you for all you do for your associations, for your members, for everybody, especially during this really difficult time. You're making hard decisions. It's stressful. I see you. Thank you. Have a great day.